Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Newcastle upon Tyne Unitarians. Welcome on this bright spring morning. I hope it's bright for you wherever you are. This morning, we very kindly have Stephen Jackson taking our service. So I would like to hand over to you now, Stephen.
Yes, and perhaps we could start by lighting the chalice, please. Thank you. Be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Really? The New Testament is not the only scripture to talk about perfection. In the Bhagavad Gita, for example, it is written, to act on behalf of the Supreme is to act without attachment for the result. That is perfect action to the highest degree, recommended by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Similarly, in the Analects of Confucius we can read, let every attainment in what is good be firmly grasped. Let perfect virtue be accorded with. In the book of Job, God cast away a perfect man, neither will he help the evildoers. Finally, one more example, this time from the Quran. Those admitted to paradise will say, O Lord, perfect our light for us. Many religions then put forward that there is at the heart of human spiritual experience a call to be perfect, to be utterly unselfish and compassionate. Commonly, this is interpreted as a call to align ourselves with an immaculate, loving, but demanding, perhaps even terrifying essence, which is at the heart of all things. In some traditions, this is called God. But are all these major traditions right? Do you ever think that to live up fully to your faith or your ideals, really you ought to be utterly loving, unselfish, compassionate? And if so, how do you respond? Let's exercise. I'm going to read some sayings attributed to Jesus in the New Testament. Some are from what is usually called the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew's Gospel. The rest from Luke's Sermon on the Plain, which covers much the same ground. For the exercise, I don't think it matters whether these were real events and sayings of the historical Jesus. I just want you to imagine you are there, the crowd. You may find it easier if you close your eyes. You've come out to listen to Jesus. You are hearing his words for the first time. How do you react? What do you think and feel? You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. And whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the fire of hell. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, Do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you. And if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. But love your enemies. Do good to them. Answer them without expecting to get anything back. Therefore be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Now, in a moment of silence, I invite you to reflect on how you have responded to these sayings. Amen. Well, I don't know what thoughts and feelings you had during that exercise, but a common first reaction to the spiritual call to be perfect is to think, this is impossible. And among those who take this call seriously, another common reaction may be to feel unworthy, guilty and fearful when comparing our own lives with God the faultless. Martin Luther wrote about his early life as an Augustinian friar. I tried as hard as I could to keep the monastic rule. I used to be contrite and make a list of my sins. I confessed them again and again. I scrupulously carried out the penances which were allotted to me. And yet my conscience kept nagging. It kept telling me, you fell short there. You weren't sorry enough. You left sin off your list. I was trying to cure the doubts and scruples of the conscience. But the more I tried these remedies, the more troubled and uneasy my conscience grew. The urge to be perfect does not exclusively come from or exist within our spiritual experience, then. Throughout our lives, there are secular societal pressures to be perfect. For example, not to make any mistakes in a primary school arithmetic test. Then maybe later to have the perfect body shape, to be the perfect parent, and so on. This kind of pressure is more potent for some people than for others, because to varying degrees, perfectionism is an aspect of some people's personalities. We're now going to do another short exercise, which I hope may help each focus on how far you are a perfectionist by nature. If you've brought a pen and paper, now is the time to use them. I'm going to read a series of statements. The statements derive from a questionnaire used clinically by psychologists to identify perfectionism. In each case, you're asked to note whether you agree strongly with the statement, agree a little, disagree strongly. What we're doing here is clearly a scientific exercise. We're not going through the whole questionnaire, as it would take too long, and the results should be interpreted by someone who knows what they're doing. However, in each case, I think it's fairly clear which answers a perfectionist would give. So to recap, I'll read out the statements and you just note either on paper or in your mind whether you agree strongly, agree a little, disagree strongly. If someone does a task better than me, I feel that I have failed. If I do not do well all the time, people will not respect me. I hate being less than the best at things. I never felt I could meet my parents' expectations. I tend to get behind in my work because I repeat things over and over. Even when I do something very carefully, I often feel that it's not quite right. Other people seem to accept lower standards from themselves than I do. And finally, I feel bad if someone tells me I have performed satisfactorily. So I wonder how many of those statements you agreed with. We'll now have a short period of silence in which I invite you to think about whether there are areas of your life in which you experience the urge to be perfect, or yourself unrealistic standards or goals. If so, what do you think and feel about that? Straight after the silence, Diana will play us some music, which is Lao Tzu Eru by Doug Maxwell. When the boxer, Cassius Clay, converted to Islam and changed his name to Muhammad Ali, I wonder what his new imam thought about going around claiming, "I am the greatest." To be fair, Ali may have made these claims mainly to gain a psychological advantage over boxing opponents. But we can all become conceited from time to time, and when we do, it is useful for us to be reminded of our shortcomings. On the other hand, most of us, most of the time, are only too well aware that we are far from perfect. Over a century, advances in communications technology have shown us, with ever greater immediacy, humanity's capacity for inhumanity. The British public received news of the First World War mainly through newspapers, letters, and word of mouth. By the Second World War, the Nazi concentration camps, for example, were also reported on the radio and in cinema newsreels, though largely only once the camp liberated. During the Vietnam War, moving pictures were delivered into family homes on the television sets that most households in developed countries by then possessed. At the time of the First Gulf War, more or less live, rolling news coverage became common, and more recently, even where no journalists are present, incidents in war and human rights abuses have often been made by individuals at the scene who use their phones to take videos, which they then broadcast via the internet. The Holocaust, the Cambodian genocide, the Rwandan genocide and Eastern DRC, Srebrenica, 9/11, ISIS, the Rohingya, Yemen. After these and many other atrocities, we can no longer have any illusions about the depths to which human beings can sink on a mass scale. As individuals, I expect none of us is responsible for killing large numbers of people. However, if we have lived a few decades, we have probably done a few things of which we are seriously ashamed. And I'm sure we have each done many more that show us that, in small ways, we are all too capable of being mean, selfish, hurtful, unjustifiably angry, and so on. In other words, we are well aware that we are weak, flawed creatures. So when perfection calls to us in the garden, we hide because we know that we are naked. To put this in more concrete terms, if we think we ought to be perfect, we are bound to fail, and this can lead us to feel guilt, anxiety, and low self-esteem. As we saw, Martin Luther was for a time overwhelmed by such feelings, perhaps because he also felt so intensely the need to live up to standards required by a God and which he found impossible to meet. In the secular sphere too, setting for oneself impossibly high standards can lead to much the same types of emotion, those of failure, guilt, anxiety, and low self-esteem. This is perhaps why psychologists are so interested in perfectionism, that they create questionnaires to measure it in a clinical context. Moreover, I understand that those who are prone to set themselves standards of perfection commonly do so because they already have low self-esteem. Such people may believe that they don't deserve love or respect and will only receive them if they earn it. So a vicious cycle can set in, whereby low self-esteem leads to setting unattainably high standards in order to earn love and respect, which leads to a sense of failure when the standards are not met, reinforcing the low self-esteem. It is therefore perhaps unsurprising that academic studies have shown associations between perfectionism and depression, neurosis, compulsive behaviors like excessive checking, hypersensitivity to criticism, avoidance strategies like procrastination, eating disorders, alcohol and substance abuse, and even suicidal impulses. Of course, by no means everyone is vulnerable to such toxic perfectionism. However, some are, and if any of us tries to be perfect in any sphere, aren't we bound to have some feelings of failure? Against that background, what are we to do with the call to be utterly loving and selfless that most major religions identify? You may like to ponder that question during the musical interlude, which we will have in a moment. Then, in the remainder of this address, I will give you my thoughts on that question. What are we to do with the call to be utterly loving and selfless that most major religions identify? The music is Now the Silence by Juan Sanchez. I left you with a question. What are we with the call to be utterly loving and selfless that most religions identify? Well, some religious traditions actively promote the state of feeling wretched when comparing one's human failings with a standard of spiritual perfection. You may ask, why on earth do they do that? Aren't religions supposed to help us in life, not cripple us emotionally? I think that at least part of the answer is that some religions are helping us by reminding us of our human failings. These traditions maintain that in order for a person to enter a right relationship with the divine, they must repent. That is, their human pride, self-will, and love of wickedness must be broken, much as a wild horse is broken. And what better way of achieving this than making a sinner painfully aware of their failings, compared with a divine standard of perfection? A dramatic example of this is provided by Luther's Catholic contemporary, Ignatius Loyola, the leading founder of the Jesuits. For someone who was eventually to be made a saint, Loyola led a colourful early life. His first appearance in history is as the defendant in a court case. He was accused of what were recorded simply as great crimes. He claimed to be a clergyman and therefore outside the jurisdiction of the court. However, the court records note that not only was his name not on the Vicar General's list of clergy, but also Loyola usually wore armour and carried a musket, sword, dagger, and other weapons. A few years later, a cannonball broke Loyola's leg, and he experienced the joy of having the leg set, broken again because it wasn't straight, reset, broken a third time, and then reset again, all 350 years before effective anaesthetic. During his convalescence, the only reading matter available to Loyola comprised devotional books, and he appears to have undergone a conversion. He then subjected himself to an arduous programme of prayer and austerity, like Luther, racked by a sense of inadequacy before God. During this period, he drafted The Spiritual Exercises, a book that details the programme for a month-long retreat spent in a cell, alone and in silence. The person on retreat is encouraged to consider their absolute depravity, how they are a poisonous sore on society as a result of their appalling, unbridled willfulness. The participant is to imagine in sensual detail the consequence, eternal damnation. They are to visualize the horrors of hell, listen to the damned screaming, smell them burning, ask to feel the pain they suffer. This is aimed to lead the subject to throw themselves on the mercy of the Virgin and of Christ, who in his infinite love has provided a means of freeing undeserving humans from the torments of hell. The penitent must then submit themselves utterly to the Church as the bride of Christ and to its leadership, giving up their own judgment even to the point of believing that what is white is black, if the Church declares it so. In other words, for Loyola, the solution for a weak human facing a perfect God was to put his faith utterly in the Church and the Pope. The problem with this solution is that the Renaissance popes led military campaigns, arranged for political enemies to be assassinated, engaged in conspicuous consumption on art and buildings on a grand scale, and so on. In other words, the Church and the Pope were flawed. Luther knew this and placed his utter trust in the saving grace of God, as disclosed to us, Luther said, in God's infallible word in the Bible. For Luther, God's grace comes to us even though we're utterly undeserving. This may seem an improvement on relying on the Renaissance papacy, but I still think that for most Unitarians, it won't wash. Don't we think the Bible, like any book, is not infallible, and more generally that any human being, institution or book is bound to be fallible as a guide to the spiritual life? Mainstream Christians may disagree with this view and live upright but not perfect lives. Yet some still feel excessive guilt, sadness, and anxiety about their moral imperfections. Why might this be? Well, as members of a conscious social species, humans are very aware of hierarchies and may be highly motivated to maintain and improve our places within them. Therefore, it is perhaps not surprising that many people are psychologically prone to compare ourselves with others and be self-critical about our failings. Against that background, if a believer thinks God commands them to be perfect and they have fallen short, that may be enough to make them feel guilt, sadness, and anxiety, which may not be entirely removed by whatever else a person believes about God, such as that God is merciful and willing to forgive. Therefore, Catholic guilt can be a real phenomenon. So too can Protestant guilt, and I expect guilt in any other religious traditions that put forward a God who demands perfection. So what approach might we take to the urge to be spiritually perfect? In my experience, Unitarians don't go in much for saying we're all wretched, sinful creatures. Should we just acknowledge that we are capable of good and bad, accepting our limitations while trying to be good? I think there is something to be said for this balanced approach, in that it will muffle the mental anguish that I hope I have demonstrated can result from setting impossibly high standards and then failing to meet them. However, if you simply ignore the radical call to be perfect made by Jesus and many other religious teachers, I think you're missing out. I don't know if you can immediately call to mind any people you've been impressed with because of their love and kindness towards others. People like that whom I have met haven't made me feel inadequate, guilty, ashamed. Far from it. Because they were kind and loving, they have made me feel accepted, lovable, worthwhile, inspired. You see, good people don't make us feel bad. They make us feel it is possible to be good. And they don't expect us to obey them slavishly or copy them unthinkingly. So might it be like that with the religious call to be perfect? Might we consider this call not as a command, but fond invitation from the Spirit of love, an invitation to be fully alive, to see we are capable of being more like it, to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. I think that is a perfect message for a perfectionist like me to hear. How about you? So, and I want to allow a bit of time if any of the rest of you would like to add any thoughts that you have on the matters that we've been discussing in today's service. It's entirely optional, but if you would like to say anything, just unmute yourself and then mute yourself afterwards. Thank you.
Can I just say something? I'm not sure whether this is entirely relevant or not, but I'm a perfectionist like you, Stephen, as well. It's a real problem. One of the things that I've read about is perfection and creativity, and it is a huge barrier to creativity because the pursuit of perfection quite often means that nothing gets done. Everything is rejected. It's obviously, I think it's quite similar with people. I'm going off on a tangent here, but I once saw a church notice which said, some people are so heavenly minded, they are no earthly good. And I think it's a similar sort of thing. The pursuit of perfection means that you don't get yourself, all the mess and everything that's in the world, so nothing good actually happens. That's just a couple of thoughts that occurred to me as the service went on.
I mean, maybe that's partly behind, what people talk about writer's block, don't they? You just want to get, and I know certainly, there are some authors who just spent, ages and ages recorrecting things. But, yeah, sure, absolutely.
Nothing's good enough.
Yeah. Anyone else like to say?
Well, I'm very much a perfectionist as well. So a lot of that spoke to me. I totally agree with what you said, David, about it being a block to creativity as well. It's a block to so many things. It's not a way to live your life with excessively high expectations. And there's a pathway of accepting your failings that is much more productive and calm and just generally more enjoyable. But if you tend towards perfectionism, that is a challenging path. And it's one I'm trying to learn to walk as I get older.
Yeah.
So thank you, Stephen. It resonated with me a lot.
Anyone else want to add anything? Right. Thank you. As we have a little bit of time, instead of a blessing, or maybe perhaps even as a blessing, I'd like to finish with a bit of creative work of my own, with apologies to the one or two of you who have already heard this poem. I wanted to read it really because I think as a mark of own appreciation for the community that the Unitarian Church, both locally and more broadly, has provided to me during this year of lockdown, and it's called "To Our Church 1 Year On." There is a kind of knowledge that's a feeling, not a fact, and maybe now you know what you have long since known. A church is just a box. But then there are so many forms a box may take. A jewellery box, a toolbox, and a lunchbox that set you on your weekday way. A musical box, a theatre box, a goggle box, or even just a bird box, matchbox and dispatch box, an incubator or a coffin. Maybe a fight, bare-knuckled, or with gloves and rules. A plant that gardeners may cultivate and shape, or set in lines to raise a hedge. Jack-in-a-box, time capsule, Bible box, camera obscura, sentry box and penalty box. A box you win squeeze box. A think outside the box, or just a chatterbox. Now our church has been a locked up, locked down, empty box, so long you hardly miss it, or miss it very much. Each Sunday while we sit as ones and twos in spreadsheet rows of flat and tiny cells. Don't you now know what you have long since known? Our church is not the box, it's us. And yearning, now swelling like a symphony, to reach out hands beyond each box, to search, encounter, and embrace. Perhaps we can now extinguish the chalice, and thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you very kindly.